Good morning, dear honored guests, dear students. I'm very happy to welcome you all to our first event with Manfred Weber today. He's the first event of the EU Week next week, and he's the group leader of the European People's Party in the European Parliament. So please welcome with me Manfred Weber with a warm applause. Our highlight today is a keynote by Manfred Weber and a followed moderated discussion. Afterwards, we will have a Q&A session with your questions. But first, I'd like to introduce to you Professor Dr. Hanna Milanov. She is the Professor for International Entrepreneurship here at TUM, and she will provide some welcoming words. Professor Milanov, the stage is yours.
Hi, good morning. It is rare to have been invited to open again this amazing event because I was honored, thank you Joachim, for opening it 6 years ago. 6 years ago I was coming back from maternity leave. Joachim said, we're doing something important here, EU Week. We need to show our commitment to Europe. We need to involve in a dialogue about Europe. That day I was daring enough, perhaps, to make a wish. And I said, if I can make a wish for the next event, I would love for our students to be the ones who are leading the event, rather than us, academics, in the back. And therefore, I am so excited to see TUM Speaker Series, this incredible organization of students who are bringing the best minds from politics, science, and business to our stage. So big applause for TUM Speaker Series. I think they're really doing an incredible job. Why would I want to say something here? I think it's really two small messages for you to contemplate going forward into this event, which is an opportunity to learn about Europe, the future of Europe, and debate and discuss how we can make it even better. On one hand, we can speak about the university and the role of the university in Europe. And TUM, I was just looking up the statistics. I was amazed. You know, when I was a senior vice president of the university some 7 years ago, we had around 25% international students. Nowadays, that statistic is 41%. 41%, it's incredible. Of 50,000 students that we have on campus are coming from all sides of the world. This gives us a chance to get to know each other, to celebrate diversity, but also to discover common values that we have among us, which I think is the fundament of what EU is trying to do and has been successfully doing so for the most part. At the same time, another thing that is most known to students, at least when it comes to EU and universities, is probably the Erasmus program. Erasmus program is a spearhead of really hope and amazing exchanges in connecting a web of ideas and students across Europe. And sometimes it comes with convenient side effects. So while TUM is the #1 German university when it comes to outgoing students in the Erasmus program, what we don't know is the statistic of how many of the 1 million babies that came out of Erasmus exchanges are in fact due to TUM. However, what we do know is that these 1 million Erasmus babies are true citizens of Europe when it comes to the European identity. And in that sense, as universities, we have a responsibility to make a better future and a better Europe for those babies. How do we do that? We try to do excellent research, of course, and this is where European Union is so helpful to us. We have proudly won 185 ERC, European Research Council grants, to do excellent research. As an entrepreneurial university, we are also launching startups into Europe to make more entrepreneurial Europe. In doing so, also spearheading as one of the first founding members of the first alliance of technical universities of Europe, the Eurotech. We open an office in Brussels to keep this dialogue and exchange going with people like Manfred Weber to better have better conversations about research, about education, about innovation. But when I say that we're an entrepreneurial university, I'm also incredibly proud to see our students not just starting out companies, whether they're unicorns or not, but really having a mindset of understanding technology, understanding politics, understanding society around us in their studies, and then coming with this entrepreneurial mindset of how do I look at the world around me with my skills and make it that much better. Whether I work in the government, whether I work in an NGO, whether I work in a big company across the street. And this is where I come to a personal message, and the personal message is, once upon a time, I was a girl living in Yugoslavia, not part of Europe. Then there was a war. Then we were struggling with, overcoming some of the issues that a war comes with. If that young girl was told that I would one day be the youngest senior vice president of the best technical university in Germany, I would not have believed it. So in that sense, as I think about what Europe did for me and what it's doing for now my two very confused trilingual children who are trying to figure out their identity in the world, I'm just inviting you to not take what we have here for granted, to be curious about the people around you, to be curious and learn about what the future of Europe holds with its opportunities and challenges, and to find points of connection in common. So, for example, I have learned in reading Mr. Weber's biography that we both share an experience of being the youngest in some surrounding. You were the youngest member of the Bavarian parliament. I was the youngest professor at some point when I had my first job in Madrid, Spain. I study entrepreneurs. You were an entrepreneur yourself, and you see in politics a responsibility to make the world and Europe that much better. We share a common goal because I see in academia a responsibility to grow the best talents and open doors for them. So I think together in an exchange we can do some great things. Thank you for joining us at this amazing event. I wish you a great week of learning, a great journey. Joachim, thank you again for persisting and growing this event to what it is today. Wish you many successful events in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation and also for the warm welcome. It's great to be here and to talk about Europe in the place of a university where students are there, where innovation is there, where future is there, the future generation of Europe is there. To listen to you also, what are your thoughts about this project of Europe? I don't know, and I thank you very much for the welcome address, but I don't know whether we can contribute today to add anything to the 1 million questions. So I guess in the morning it's not appropriate to do so. No, I'm joking. But it is a good symbol for what Europe delivers. When I was considering what could be my contribution for this morning, for the kick-off speech and giving some input and starting the debate afterwards, I was considering, let's talk about Erasmus, let's talk about the research money we have on European level, let's talk about artificial intelligence regulation we have currently on the table, let's talk about, I don't know, climate change. So all the legislation, as a lawmaker, as a man in the European Parliament, as a leader of the biggest group in the European Parliament, the People's Party, I can talk a lot about these details on the concrete regulation. And there is a lot currently on the table, a lot on the table. We are at the end of our mandate. Next year, in May and June, there are again elections for the European Parliament. So at the end of a mandate, normally legislative, we have on the legislative workflow, we have a lot on the table. But I was considering probably to have the chance to talk with you, European-minded students who have an interest about what is the future. I want to probably talk a little bit more general about things, because I think we are in a moment of European development where a lot is at stake and a lot is to be discussed for the future. I would present you some wishes I would have for the future of Europe. My first big wish would be give Europe the chance to present success stories. What I mean with this? we have Brexit in mind. Politicians like Boris Johnson, David Cameron from the Tories, both of them were driving the development towards Brexit with the referendum, and Boris Johnson then as Prime Minister to implement it. Both of them were building up their political career with doing a very simple messaging, also supported by the media in London, with a very simple message: Great Britain is great, and all the blame goes to Brussels. Brussels is a bad thing. In Brussels it's always raining, always storm, and London is always sunshine. Huh? That was the message. And probably both politicians are the worst example, but we have a lot of these examples all over Europe, all over Europe. Even in my party, oh, I'm online, oh, what is, okay. Even in my party we had a kind of a transition on this. And if you do so, how can then David Cameron convince citizens in Great Britain when he was asking for the referendum on Brexit? How can he then stand in front of people and tell them, oh, it's really bad, huh? It's really always stormy in Brussels, but we have to stay inside of the European Union? Sorry, that will not work. That's why please give Europe the chance that we have success stories. And I give you some success stories. We implemented last Strasbourg session the law about ETS, emission trade system. We do the legislation to be the first continent on the world to be climate neutral in 2050. We are the most ambitious on this. Unified. Even poor countries like Romania are, Germany, France, Spain, everybody is united in this ambition. Parties, my party, center-right, Social Democrats, Greens, Liberals, everybody is united in these ambitions. We all voted horizontal in favor of this. I am proud about this to be a European because we are leading this. Paris Agreement would not have been possible without the leadership of Europe. That is success story of Europe. And I give you probably a more important thing. I'm born in 1972, and I'm the first generation, please listen, I'm the first generation on this continent who could say, I live all over Europe in peace and freedom. The first generation ever. My father's generation was the first generation who could say, I live my whole life in peace. But half of the European Union was locked up behind the Iron Curtain, without freedom. And my grandfather's generation was in the Second World War. So that's why I'm the first generation who can say, and you are the second, who can say we live all over Europe in peace and freedom. And that's an amazing success story of the European unification. That's why let allow that Europe has success stories. That is my first message. My second question is, when I consider what is the plan for the next step, we have to stop egoism on European level. When we talk about legislation, when we talk about European ideas, the first message is always, what do I benefit? What is my profit out of it? And I think we have to stop this. We have to ask the question, what is the broader European added value? What is the broader success story for all of us? And I can give you some examples, but I don't want to be too long. The third message is, for me, we have, if we want to have the success of Europe, we have to respect rules in Europe. Because if we accept something, if we define some common rules, how we live together on this continent, and then everybody goes home and is not really ready to implement it, then it will not work on the long run. That is very practically, for example, on stability of our currency, the euro, 3%, 60%. Do we stick to the rules we agreed on? But it is probably more important for the general question about rule of law, you know, about the fundamental thing of rule of law, independence of media, independence of our judiciary. I learned that some friends from Poland are also connected. You know, we have with Poland, with the PiS government, there are fundamental questions on the table, whether they respect the independence of the highest court in Poland, where we as European Union are saying we respect the national decision-making process, we respect the national independence, but when it is about the independence of a judiciary, we cannot look away. We have to focus, we have to talk about this. That's fundamental for our European way of doing things. A fourth point is, for me, we have to be ready for innovation. That's probably on a university place easy to say, but I tell you, for a big part of our societies, that is difficult. In the US, you know, we have a split between rural areas and the cities. The bubbles, the high developed regions, east-west coast, and the rural areas. And there you also have a split on innovation, on being ready for taking step towards the modern world and to the innovative world about the future. I warn us in a way that probably the same could happen in Europe. We see this with this growing right extreme parties all over Europe, where people feel left behind, and that's why they look for easy solutions, populistic solutions in the European Union. That's why we all, you as people who are driving a university, as students, as professors, we have to care, we have to go out, we have to talk with everyone, even those who are probably not so well advanced, not so well educated like we are. We have to define borders. That sounds a little bit difficult because Europe is without borders. I think we have to define it. We have to define what belongs to Europe and what is not belonging to Europe. Probably a little bit more controversial, but my point of view is that the people in Western Balkan, so those who are from Slovenia, from Croatia, they enjoy already being part of the European Union. But people from Serbia, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Montenegro, and so on, they are still struggling. We have a lot of brain drain, a lot of young people are leaving this. And I'm deeply convinced that this Europe, and they have to become a part of the European Union to give them the same equal development chances like others have. And also Ukraine, Moldova, where we have the terrible war now going on in Ukraine, and also Georgia must have a perspective towards the European Union. That is for me Europe. And on the long run, I also dream about the end of Lukashenko and Belarus, and probably, let's see. But I tell you, on the other hand, I think that when I go out in the street here and I ask people, do you think that Belgrade or Warsaw or Split are Europe? Then people tell me and look in my eyes and say, crazy question, for sure that is Europe. But if I ask the same people, tell me, do you think that the region of Kurdistan, so close to the Iraq border in the east of Turkey, is this Europe? Then I would say 95%, even more, would say, no, that's not Europe. I want to have close relationship. We have to have a good cooperation. But that is not Europe anymore. So that is the question, what is Europe? We already had once a request from Morocco to join the European Union. And we said as Europeans, clearly, geographically, Morocco is not a Europe. That's why you cannot join. We want to have good relationship, exchange of views, culturally, students, and so on and so forth, economically, but not Europe. That's why there is a question in front of us. What is the final composition? What is the final structure of today's European Union? And you hear from my words that I deeply believe that this kind of identity, this kind of feeling, being together, being one continent, is important. And let me be clear, that has nothing to do with any kind of religion, because in Bosnia and Herzegovina we have a big majority of Muslim communities there. They are Europeans, no doubt about this. It's not about religion. It's about the question that geographic background, cultural background, these kind of things have to be considered. We can come to different answers, but it has to be considered in a way. The sixth point I want to mention is about responsibility. I spoke already about the politicians like Johnson and Cameron. I have to say that my experience when we talk about European legislation is that in Brussels, ministers and prime ministers and chancellors are sitting together, finding a compromise. Scholz is voting in favor, Habeck is voting in favor, Lindner is voting in favor. So we find a conclusion there. 95% of all legislation on European level is supported by the German government, whoever governs, so it's not a party political question, because we find in Europe always a compromise. We always try to find a compromise, and that's a tradition of Europe. That's great. But on the other hand, a lot of these ministers from all over Europe, from Vienna, Rome, also Paris, are concluding and voting in favor in Brussels, but then they are in their plane back home to their capital. They are going out of this plane, and then the national press is in front of them, and then they tell the national press, oh, in Brussels they have discussed and decided so stupid things, and this is bad for us, and this is bad for us, and this is bad for us. And that's why I ask all politicians, please take over responsibility. If you vote in Brussels in favor, go back home and explain it. Tell it people why it is in our interest to do so. The seventh point I want to make is Europe can only have a long-term perspective, can only survive if it is a democratic Europe. I'm a member of a parliament, of a European parliament. We are representing more than 400 million people. We are the second biggest democracy in the world. The first is India. The second biggest is the European Parliament. Next year, when we have on the 9th of June European elections, this is a great event. Millions, hundreds of millions of people vote for their European Parliament. I can tell you that I don't need additional power. There is no law, no legislation without a majority in the European Parliament anymore. We have full legislative power. We have full budgetary power, so no money is spent without the support of the European Parliament majority. And I like also the tradition of the culture in my party, in my parliament, because as a group leader, I'm representing around 180 members, the biggest group in the European Parliament. But when I stand in front, like yesterday, we had a group meeting in Brussels, I stood in front of the people there, and then I have there the colleagues from Spain, from Greece, from Ireland, from Lithuania. When I have colleagues there, then I have no tool to force anyone to vote like I, as group leader, want to see it. That means that the colleagues are nominated and elected in their regions. That is for all parties the same. The only power we have as group leaders and as those who want to achieve something is to build up trust and to build up a compromise. It's not like the German system, I have to say, where you have strong leaders and they decide about everything in a way. It's about real bottom-up principle. And I like this very much, even as a group leader. It's tough sometimes, but I like it very much. This democratic Europe must be strong, and that's why the election of a commission president, we talk about Spitzenkandidat, for example, to have a lead candidate in front of elections, is for me crucial. And probably, finally, the 8th and 9th point is about identity, because I believe that the future of Europe can only work if we develop a strong European identity. I myself, I'm a Bavarian, and I would probably, as a second level, say I'm first an European before I'm a German. That's my personal identity. Because for my way of how do I live is probably Upper Austria, Linz, more closer to my Bavarian way of doing things than the friends from Hamburg or from Berlin. So that's why I love very much to have different layers of identity. The right extremists tell us that is bullshit. There is only national identity. And that is obviously bullshit when they say something. So the richness of Europe is to have different identities, to be a proud Bavarian, to be a German citizen with a German passport, no doubt about this, and to be proud to be a European. And if we can bring this European identity really alive, probably with having the richness seen to the European way of life, when it is about different languages, culture. When you are driving with a train through Europe, you see so much diversity. Even with some drink good beers, others drink good wine. We have so good food quality in Europe. You know, it's so beautiful to be European in a way. I think we must feel this also. It's not only a technical thing. We must feel it. And probably as a last point, I want to refer to President Zelensky. He was in the European Parliament at the first anniversary of the beginning of the war a few weeks ago. And he stood in front of the members of the European Parliament, and in his speech he spoke around 20 times about the European way of life. Because we speak about a French, a German, and Italian identity, but what is really the European identity? And he, as a president who fights for becoming member of the European Union, for joining our value community, he spoke about the European way of life. And what does this mean for me? Please consider, we have all over Europe the idea of democracy. We have all over Europe the idea of social market economy. That's not the case in America. They are still struggling about a health system to do it in a solidarity way. We have all over Europe the ban of death penalty. Imagine, look to the global level. The Americans still have death penalty. We have all over Europe the ban of death penalty. We have all over Europe the basic idea of equal treatment of men and women, about your sexual, about your race, background. So that is basic for us. Equal treatment of everyone, human right. And as headline for everything we have above the European way of life, freedom. freedom for all of us. That makes us to be European. And Zelensky speaks about these things. He reminds us about what is the DNA of being an European. And I think this kind of living, this kind of approaching a society, this European way of life is also an extremely attractive offer to the rest of the world. I don't want to lecture anyone else, but I want to convince the others that our way of doing things is a good way of doing things. That is, I think, what we need to develop this identity, to be proud about being European and also feel it and also see it and also touch it. So thank you so much for listening, and I would be happy for a good debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that inspiring keynote. Please have a seat and help yourself to some water.
Thank you.
So let's start easy. What is the European Union for you as a member of the European Parliament?
Well, the European Union today is the biggest, first of all, the biggest peace project, and the European Union helps us in a way as a structure, first of all, as also with the institutions there, helps us to survive in a globalized world, because individual member states are not ready anymore, are not anymore capable to give really a proper answer to the big developments on global level. That's why it is an important tool for answering the future.
So as we are talking about a globalized world and common problems, as we all know and as you already said, climate neutrality is a goal and the climate change is a problem. To our goal to have the European green energy transition. Just for some facts, alone in 2021, the EU imported approximately 13.8 billion euros worth of green energy products, mostly solar panels, and most of them from China. How could we be independent as Europe and decrease our dependency on China in the same process?
That's a key fundamental challenge for us. You know, basic for the success story economically for the European Union are open markets. We are a trading continent. We are technologically advanced. A lot of people enjoy to buy European, also German, Bavarian products. So that is what we are depending on. So that's why we have no interest to close borders. We have no interest to go back to any kind of going back on globalization process. We are depending on this. That's why I'm a big fan of trade agreements. For example, with Mercosur, we have South America. They are not perfect, but there are democracies. Lula is now elected in Brazil, for example. We have 800 million consumers there, very open-minded to Europe, because a lot of them have a migration tradition from Europe. They are linked to Europe. And I would be happy to finalize a trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur, because we depend so much in this open market approach. But obviously, having also the Russian experience now on an energy in mind, where we also trusted in this open market approach, that we have a rule-based world where we can trust each other. And we saw what happened in the last 2 years. Having this in mind, we must give up on our naivety on this aspect. So to be not naive as Europeans. I am in favor of building up a trade union of the free democratic world. South America, India, Japan, Australia, Europe, US, Canada. That is what I dream about. And to reduce our dependency towards China. And I had yesterday talks with Ursula von der Leyen. She was a few days ago in Beijing, had the talks with the president of China. And my conviction is, my point of view is that the Chinese have already decided to close their borders. They tell to the European companies, if you want to sell products in China, you have to produce in China. That is what BASF is doing. That is what BMW is doing. That's why, again, I say we have to not go to protectionism. That is important. But we have to rebalance our trade relationships, and then we can find a good middle way in this ambitious approach, but not losing technological capacity in Europe.
Yes, and as you already talked about Mercosur, what should the treatment include to be fair and sustainable and to match the values of the EU? Because many of them aren't matched by the Mercosur states yet. So what do you think should the treatment include to be like fair on both sides?
Well, our challenge is that we have in Europe developed a lot of, let me say, common standards, common criteria. For example, in the agriculture field about animal welfare, how to treat animals correctly. We have a lot of standards about how to use pesticides in our farming sector, for example. And South America has not done so. So that's not the case there. That's why equal market base is an important tool. We have implemented in the Mercosur agreement some criteria, for example, to respect the labor market rules on global level from the United Nations, also in South America. But on the other hand, also for the Amazonas region to have protection of the environment there. But I have to say that we should not expect that we can overburden trade agreements with asking for too much, because we are in competition. I have to be realistic. We are in competition. I want to include in modern trade agreements some minimum criteria, but we have to see that Lula, for example, Brazil, that's the biggest country in South America, he was also a few days ago, not only in Europe, he was in Portugal and Spain, but he was also visiting China and Xi. And you know, Lula is in a situation where he has with China a huge market, where they are offering every access to the market, and they don't speak about minimum criteria. They don't care about this. They only say, come, sell, do your business. And we are always starting with first criteria. So I want to see Europe using the economic power for offering our values and also our standards, but we should not overdo it on the trade side, because there we are in competition with others. So it's a thin line, you see, it's a middle way we have
absolutely, absolutely, it's a very thin line. So as we already talked about dependencies, that pose very serious security risks to Europe. What do you think has been your biggest contribution to both strengthen the EU and its security and make it more independent as a union and from, like, for example, trade partners we are still dependent on?
You mean more generally about my contribution or on these concrete issues?
Yeah, your work in the last few years with trade agreements, you have been pretty active, as I seen in like that Mercosur trade agreement. So what has been your biggest contribution?
The challenge for a member of parliament is that you cannot say that this dossier is my dossier, because it's always a big compromise from different parties, different colleagues. You know, the job of a member of parliament, especially also my job as group leader, is to sit together, invite colleagues to show up with their position, but then how can we do it now? How it looks, does the compromise look like? That is a job, that is the parliament is a huge compromise machine, and that's good for Europe, because we need common sense. We need not splitting up, not dividing, we need common sense. And I said it, that's the culture I like very much. In Bavarian Landtag, when I was for 2 years elected in the regional parliament in Bavaria, when I was young, and there, when you prepare a speech, you always say how great your government is and how stupid the opposition is, in a way. That is always the wording of speeches. Also in the German system, in Bundestag, it's the same. The opposition has to criticize, that's a role of opposition, and the governmental responsible have to praise everything. Great, what we are doing there. And you know, it's not the one or the other, it's always the gray zone in between. And in European Parliament, when we prepare a speech, we always start our speech with, oh, I like very much the contribution from my green colleague or from my socialist colleague, but I would ask my colleague to consider probably my argument. So why I'm doing this? Because I know that even the boss of the biggest group, I have no power to impose anything in the European Parliament alone. I need always others. That's why the tone, the culture is totally different to what we see on national level in the dispute between opposition and governmental majorities. And again, I like this very much. That's why I have doubts whether I can say I contributed. Probably my biggest success story is when I would say it from an emotional point of view. I was presenting in the last election campaign 2019 the idea that Europe could be the first continent to give a proper answer about cancer. Because I think in all families we have friends, we have family members, we have someone who we lost, and in the meanwhile we invested 5 billion euros additional money next to the research money we already had on Horizon on the table, and we have organized a common research strategy for cancer, a real cancer fight against cancer plan for Europe. I always said I would be a proud European if we would contribute to be the first to give answers on cancer globally. So that would make me proud on such. And there are symbols probably where we can convince not only researchers and university people, but also normal, ordinary people to be proud about Europe when we achieve such a big goal. And that is now on a good way.
So it's innovation again is your biggest contribution. Yes, and as you already talked about migration and the bigger picture of Europe, what do you suggest for more fairness in the terms of migration policy and to strengthen diversity in the European Union and to have the European mindset as a mindset, not more the country mindset?
Well, migration is politically speaking, the open wound of this continent, because we are struggling since 2015, since the big migration crisis through the Balkan route from Syria. We are struggling to find a political answer. In the last 7-8 years, we only had national egoism. We saw closing of borders. Even today, we have border control between Germany and Austria on the motorway. So we are struggling to find a common European answer on this challenge. As a politician, I tell you, nobody can promise that we will solve migration, because since we have between Africa and Europe such a big difference on the living standards, you will always have this challenge. It's a question how to manage it in a humanitarian-based approach. That is the challenge on the table, and you know that is a big party discussion going on. So my position is that we have to protect our will to receive and respect asylum seekers. That's a big historic achievement inside of European Union. After a lot of terrible wars, we understood that we have to protect those who fight for their political ideas. That's why protect it. And we have to protect the idea that we welcome those who are fleeing from civil wars and from other wars, like we have it in Ukraine. And that has to be guaranteed. And there, the first message is that Europe is doing this every day. We welcomed, with the highest peak, 8 million Ukrainians in Europe. After the beginning of the war, we opened all the doors, even in Portugal, Ireland, everybody opened all doors. We welcomed a lot of Syrians. We welcomed in the Yugoslavia war in the 19th, Germany welcomed a lot, Austria, a lot of people there. So I think in the situation of war, in the situation of emergency, Europe showed good faith and should show the readiness. But on the other hand, we have a situation that through the Mediterranean routes, today the main route is Tunisia, Italy, through the Mediterranean route, we have after a legal procedure, so after an assessment who is coming, we are checking the reason why he is coming, the background, where he is from. More than 60% of all people who are coming through the Mediterranean route are not asylum seekers and not refugees from civil war, though Geneva Convention background. So they are migrants who want to have a better life. And I think we all understand this fully, but that is breaching the Schengen law, you know, because we have, if you want to come on a labor market-based background to Europe, then you have to ask for a visa. That is a rule. That is a rule. You have to be registered, you have to ask for a visa, and you cannot illegally cross a border and simply say, now I'm here and I want to stay. That's breaching rules and laws. And that's why on the external border it's also a challenge to implement our rules. And that means protecting borders against smugglers, against the mafia who is benefiting a lot, earning billions of euro with the hopes of people. And that is a difficult challenge on the external border. When we speak about Greek-Turkey, on the Tunisian side, and there my party is strict on implementing rules on the border. We have to respect legislation and laws. So bring things together. Readiness for humanitarian approach, ready for Syrians, for Ukrainians to be welcomed in the war times, but on the other hand, also stopping those who are illegally crossing a border and the business model behind. That is a difficult balance in this. And legislatively speaking, we have a good chance. We have now, after summer, the Spanish presidency. So you know, we have a rotating presidency in the Council of Europe. So there, Spain will take over, and Spain has the ambition to clarify this from a legislative point of view, this question of migration. And I hope for the best. As Parliament, we are ready for negotiate. We have a common understanding. We have a first reading agreed. So we are ready for the legislative talks with the council members. And probably before the European elections, I can come back and tell you that we did it and we have a common understanding on managing it.
Yeah, clearing the legislative and regulatory questions would be pretty awesome by the European Union. So before we come to our Q&A session, I still have some rapid fire questions for you, so please answer them only 1 or 2 sentences. Are you ready? So, if you would be president of the EU Commission, what would you do differently to Ms. von der Leyen?
I like very much the general approach of Ursula von der Leyen, and I fully understand that it is not easy to implement only party politics because you are chairing a grand coalition college there.
Yes. Okay. As a young student, what would you like to see from the EU and its politicians?
Honesty. Because what I told you, that so many people blamed Europe for thousands of things and made an easy exercise as politicians to say, oh, Brussels is responsible. And I would love to see an honest approach in politics towards Europe.
What would you consider your biggest success as a member of the EPP Group and as maybe a party leader to compromise? What would you see your biggest compromise success?
Well, personally, I have to say I was dealing with a lot of migration dossiers when I arrived in the European Parliament as member, and even as a young member in the European Parliament, you have the chance to immediately get big dossiers where you are, as a member of Parliament, the responsible spokesperson, coordinator for the whole Parliament. And that's great, to have responsibility, to have the chance to manage things and to compromise on these things. So there, the migration dossiers were first in my mind. After I became now group leader, again, I am a little bit more distant to the concrete dossiers. So the job of a group leader, also commission president, is a horizontal one. So you have to manage unity, and that's why today's job is to keep my team together. You know, I have so much different ideas in the EPP family to keep us together. That is my job today.
And last question, with all your knowledge and experience that you gained so far, do you look optimistic about the EU's future?
Well, I listen now to your questions, and the future of Europe is in my hands a little bit, but mainly in your hands. It's about your Europe, and you have to decide. I'm optimistic by nature, but the question whether we win with this European identity, with this European spirit, is up to you, how you define yourself, how you see yourself. And I tell you, in your generation, we also see, look to France with Le Pen there, look to Poland. We have a lot of young people in Poland who are very much following the very nationalistic approach. So it's up to your generation to define this again and to find a common understanding.
So let's come to our Q&A session then. Now it's time for the audience to ask your questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Please stand up while asking it. My team will hand you a microphone.
How should we in the European Union address the rise of right-wing populists? Should we rather appease them, try to change them, or is it important that we present a united front against them, so maybe have a firewall against the right? And maybe more importantly, could you give me an example of how the EPP is addressing this issue?
Shall I directly? That's for my political family, you can imagine, the key strategic issue on the table, because we are center-right. So we are, when you look today, the landscape of the European Parliament, EPP is in the center, so we occupy the center, but we are also center-right. And then we have 2 additional groups in the European Parliament. One is the conservative group, ECR, and then we have the identity group, that is Le Pen and AfD and so on. That is the structure. And for us, having the polls for next year's elections in mind, strategically speaking now, currently we have a situation where all political families in the European Parliament will lose. Socialists in Germany quite bad, in France not anymore existing, in Italy they're struggling, in Spain. We have liberals, Macron is in a very bad situation in France currently, not a lot of support. German FDP is not doing well, Ciudadanos in Spain is disappearing. Then we have the Greens also losing. German Greens are not getting the same result like last time, for example. In Central Eastern European countries, Greens are not existing. So in Poland, in Romania, in Slovakia, there are no Green parties there. So that's why, and even my party is shrinking. EPP is again shrinking. And the big winner, if there would be today a vote, if there would be today an election, is everything to the center right from the EPP, so to the right side of EPP. That is today's reality. I would wish to see another picture, but that's today's reality. And I would separate this camp. I would separate this camp because we have, for example, in the Netherlands, a party that is a BBB party, the Farmers and Citizens Party called. They became in the last regional elections the #1 party of Netherlands. But they are not against Europe. They are not against Ukraine. They are not against gay marriages, nothing at all. They are not the classical right extreme parties, but they are frustrated. They have the feeling that rural areas, farmers, you don't listen anymore to us. You don't care. You don't show respect anymore to parts of our societies which are probably not so well advanced like you are, not so well educated like you. I don't know how to call it, you know what I mean? So to keep our society together, and that is the job of my party, to take care about them and to listen, and to give them the clear idea. I tell you, yes, there is a future. I want to have a modern agriculture policy, but I care about your concerns, about your property, about your farm, about your future of your family, about your income. I care about you. And this is a part of society where I would say that's my job, the job of my party, to listen, to care, to take this up. And that's why this is, in a way, the more democratic, concern-based political part of our political landscape of today, where we have to focus. And the second thing is the clear firewall, where I'm on the side of Greens, of socialists, of liberals, of all democratic parties, to isolate all fascists, all nationalists. And I have defined for my party 3 criteria. You have to be, when we work together, you have to be in favor of Europe. You have to be pro-European. You have to be pro-Ukraine. At this moment of time, I think obvious. And you have to be pro-rule of law. And these 3 criteria exclude to work together with PiS in Poland, rule of law. That excludes to work together with the AfD in Germany, clear firewall. That excludes to work together with Le Pen in France for my party family. That is my firewall. But I really ask us to be a little bit more, to differentiate this camp, because there are also, I would call it populistic parties, but they have serious concerns, and Democrats must take them on board, must care about them, and not push them to the right extremists. Probably this is hopefully understand that.
Thank you very much for your insights. With Europe facing more and more security risks, what do you think about a European army, and how do you think we should strategically form it?
I'm a big fan of a European army, and I am so disappointed that currently we are spending on national level billions and billions of euros, and there is little, in Germany, nothing planned for the European investment. You know, we spend in Germany 100 billion euro, agreed in German Bundestag by mainly all parties, but we have currently no project in Germany in favor of a European investment. I would probably make it more concrete. I would say we need a European missile defense system. Missile defense is for our Ukrainian friends currently the most important military tool they have, because they are facing everyday attacks to Kiev and to cities with missiles and drones from the Russian side. So missile defense is key. And there is currently no European-wide, so for the whole European Union, project on the table to build up a European missile defense system, where I think it makes so much obvious sense to do it together. When you have in Kaliningrad Russian missiles being positioned there, and they can go to Copenhagen, to Berlin, and to Warsaw in 2, 3, 4 minutes. Huh? So it makes only European-wide sense to do it together. Huh? That's why this is needed, and also cyber defense is another example where it's so obvious. For cyber defense, it is not any more important whether the server stays in Munich or in Prague or in Vienna. It is important which software is on this server. That is so decisive today. That's why it makes so much sense to bring our best brains together and build up a European cyber defense brigade, where there on the uniform is the Europe flag, to defend the European internet structure together. So that's why I'm a big fan of this. And that's not, surprise, surprise, that's not a new idea. Because Adenauer, when he started after the Second World War, the idea of the unification of Europe, he didn't start it with steel and coals. This was the second idea, so market and business. He started with the France, with building up a European army, a European defense community. That was the first idea for building up Europe. And the original idea was, if we do defense together, then a war inside of Europe is not anymore technically possible. That was the original idea. About such visionary politicians after a few years after the Second World War, where the only feeling inside of Europe was hate against each other, was really anger and hate against each other. So that's why we are coming back to the old ideas, and we have to push for it now. And I see a lot of speeches about this, when Macron and Scholz do speeches about this, but I don't see so less implementation, and that is what I'm a little bit disappointed about.
One last short question, please.
Yes, I would like to know, in case of an armed conflict around Taiwan in, say, 2025, like some American sources predict, would the European People's Party vote in favor of sanctions against China? And how far can China go before the European Union takes action? Thank you.
I would even go one step further, because what would happen under a situation when Taiwan would be really attacked by the Chinese is one theoretical question we have to consider. But I would say, having the lesson of Russia in mind, I would even go one step earlier, and that means we should already now present the Chinese the bill, what it costs if they go. I say that we made a big mistake not to be strong and clear towards Putin. If you go to Ukraine, if you declare war, then this will be the final result for you. I think he underestimated our unity, the 10 sanctions packages and so on. He underestimated our will to be on the side of Ukraine. And that's why he felt motivated to go to Ukraine and invade. I say that it was a big mistake after 2014, after he invaded in Crimea already, not to already implement the sanctions we did. We as Germans, we were building up Nord Stream 2 after they invaded Crimea. So the message from Germany and Europe was, Putin, feel free, you can do whatever you want to do. Business will continue. I was against this already in 2014. I did speeches there. I was campaigning in 2019 against Nord Stream 2. But the general atmosphere was a different one. And that motivated Putin to do what he did. And I would say in China, we have to think now about the same concept. We have to tell the Chinese, in all peace, in all freedom, in all respect, we have to solve climate change together. We want to have a rule-based, economically fair cooperation and so on. But if you go to war against Taiwan, then this will be the outcome. That will be the result. And that's why, yes, my group will be in favor of sanctions, will be in favor of a strong sanctions package. And I tell you that this is the exact same thing like with Ukraine. We have a democracy, a small democracy, Taiwan, Ukraine, people who want to live in freedom like we enjoy it every day, who want to live the same model like we enjoy it, and they are attacked by the big neighbor who wants to bring you back to the mother country, the motherland. That's the same concept we have. And for us, the question is, on which side do we stay? And for me, it's clear Europe must always stay on the side of freedom and democracy. Full stop, full stop. And having this in mind, I also am also a big fan of being close to our American friends in this regard. I think a lot of Europeans underestimate, with having still the economic possibilities and options for China's market in mind, they underestimate the will of the Chinese leadership to build up an alternative model for how a society can look like. So democracy, autocracy, and see China is a kind of a dictatorship. That's a reality. That's why I think a lot of people in Europe still underestimate this, and that's why we are living in a new world, and my world is based on freedom and democracy. My world is based on a strong transatlantic cooperation with the Americans. We as Europeans alone will not survive in this world. That's a reality. At the end of this century, we have 4% of global population Europeans, 4%, with a shrinking economy. That brings me back to my idea the European way of life can only survive if the 4% are united.
Thank you all so much for this very interesting questions, and thank you very much for taking the time to be our guest. Please join me for a warm round of applause for Mr. Weber.
Thank you.